Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about spiritual awakening, exhaustion, the spiritual meaning of the tiredness that happens around this phenomenon of awakening. And, from a spiritual standpoint, not so much from the standpoint of something that needs to be fixed, but from the standpoint that it's actually a window for further awakening. Like a lot of people might think that spiritual awakening means that they're going to be, experiencing a sort of unlimited, everlasting, all 24/7 ebullience, joy, bliss, etc. But there's certainly that's not the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is that sort of spiritual awakening involves coming into relationship with our shadow. And so there are parts of that that don't look like bliss, parts of that that don't look like ebullience, that look a little darker often. And this sort of phenomenon of the tiredness, of fatigue, exhaustion that happens around the spiritual awakening journey is again a portal for further awakening. And so we're going to be looking at it from that perspective. But before we get there, I'm Dr. Jay Eaker from the BioSoul Integration Center, and I help people embody their soul's gifts and their soul's essence through the work that I do, something I call BioSoul Integration. It's a combination of a few different modalities, something called network spinal or network spinal analysis or network chiropractic. I've integrated, that's kind of the foundation for the work that I do, that I've been doing the last 20 years. And then I've integrated some things like IFS parts work and brain spotting and just mindfulness awareness practices to help people embody the shadow and the light. And so that they can integrate their soul's gifts into these bodies and share those gifts with the planet, so that they can do the thing that they come here to do. Please like this, share this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, do the social thing wherever you might find this. I have a audio podcast version of this as well. You can find this episode and all other episodes wherever you listen to your audio podcasts on the BioSoul Integration Podcast. And I've written a book called If It Didn't Hurt, How to Resolve Your Pain and Discover Your Life Purpose, and you can get it's kind of the ultimate guide to embodying your soul's essence, your soul's gifts, and you can get a free copy of that actually on my website at biosoulintegration.com. There you also find that I have a number of interesting books that are designed to help you further your embodied awakening journey. Okay, so let's get into the topic of the spiritual awakening exhaustion, spiritual awakening fatigue, the tiredness that kind of happens sometimes along with the spiritual awakening journey. And so to get started with that, I want to talk about kind of like this vigilance, a certain amount of vigilance that we inherit, a certain amount of vigilance that we bake into our systems early on. We're kind of born into a culture that is a planet, really, that is of humans, that is habitually bracing against life. Life, capital L life, is constantly trying to create new things and integrate those new things, a constant machine for creating novelty and harmony, for creating multiple new things, but also integrating all of those new things and harmonizing all of those new things. And since we are embedded in the fabric of life, life is constantly asking us to become more complicated, actually more complex, and to include all of those complexities in harmony. So life is always asking us to grow. That is kind of a definition of growth. Life is always asking us to grow and evolve, and when we come onto this planet, our primal sort of foundational layer of our nervous system that comes online when we're in the womb, that our human self kind of uses to learn how it is to be human. we pick up on the fact that everyone's sort of like bracing against the nature of nature. Everyone's bracing against this natural novelty and harmony machine that is life. They're trying to maintain the status quo out of a perceived need to survive. A big part of that is trying to avoid the feeling of vulnerability and uncertainty. And we feel into how that's being done all around us, and we assume, well, I have to fit in with these people for my survival, and so I'm going to tune myself the way that they've tuned themselves. And so we adopt this way of being, this way of trying to avoid, trying to create an illusion of certainty and an illusion that we have kind of all together, when the truth of the matter is that we don't know what's going to unfold in the next moment. And the fact that life is kind of holding us in that. Life is not against us. And so, again, we kind of create this program, a survival program in our nervous system that is resisting this harmony, novelty, this novelty harmony machine that is life, and how it asks us to evolve. And the way that that sort of manifests in our bodies is part of this thing that drives, or maybe it's as a result on some level of this novelty and harmony being created all the time, is life force. This movement of energy that sort of like animates all things to life, and that energy moves through us naturally. But there's a way in which when we, the part of our nervous system that is trying to sort of stop that or resist that, it grips at the life force energy in the belly, which is a lot about the vulnerable parts of us, which is a lot about safety, and it grips at the brainstem, which is kind of about this part of our spine. There's different parts of our spine that house different aspects of our being. The belly, the low back is kind of all about vulnerability and safety. The brainstem there, the top of the spine, is kind of about certainty, our relationship with the future. And as we grip at the life force energy in those places, and we kind of like stop the movement of life force energy through us as a way to try to have some control over this change that is being forced on us in a way by life. And we kind of like learn that change feels unsafe, and we go about trying to control what we feel and control our experiences in life, which means that when we encounter a situation or we encounter people that might tend to threaten this control that we have, this illusion of safety, this illusion of control, this illusion of I got it all together, we might resist that situation or these people or whatever, and in that way it affects our behavior. It limits our ability to actually give our gifts fully on the planet. And when the truth is that those people and those situations are all designed by life to help us become the person that we came here to become. And the reason, now this vigilance, how it starts to get tied into this fatigue or this tiredness that happens along with the awakening process, is that there is an enormous amount of energy that we use to try to resist this flow of life, these survival patterns in our bodies. We use an enormous amount of energy trying to because life is constantly trying to unravel that, push against it. It's like a current, a stream, a river. So, if you're standing in the river, you can feel the water pushing against you. Life is like that. It's constantly asking us to evolve, to grow, to change. And there's a part of our system that says, nope, it's pushing against that current all the time. And so it takes a lot of constant energy that we're using to constantly scan for threats. This vigilance, we're constantly scanning for threats and trying to maintain control and keep these survival patterns in place. There's a part of us that life is kind of actually trying to wear that part of us down, and over time that part of us gets more and more and more tired, and that's also kind of natural. That's also kind of by design, where we start to lose the capacity to resist life's natural flow. And often I think in our later years, I'm certainly noticing that. I'm 50. I think that's part of what happens with the midlife crisis, is that we reach a threshold where it becomes harder to resist that flow of life, resist what life is trying to turn us into. The parts of us that have been working so hard all that time to resist that, we start to really become aware of those. And we start to become aware of that tiredness. There is a thing when, for instance, when I'm working with people here in my office on these tables here, and when part of what we're doing is creating safety in the system, we are helping the nervous system see these relationships that it's created between the different parts. And there are these sort of gates, these places where, between the pelvis and the belly, between the belly and the solar plexus, between the solar plexus and the heart, between the heart and the throat, between the heart and the head, where our system is kind of like, blocked, for lack of a better term, the flow of life force energy and the connection and the relationship between those parts. And as we kind of address those different layers, and life force energy starts to move up the spine, when it finally reaches the brainstem and starts to wash into the brainstem, and it's like the fetters of that control piece start to come off. The energy that our system decided was not safe to feel or look at, we start to, the binds that were binding it start to fall away, and the belly starts to relax. We become more susceptible, more open to vulnerability and uncertainty. And the vigilance that is in our system, the vigilance that's been trying to stay awake, to wait for ready for the thing to come so that we can categorize it or make sense of it in our thinking intelligence, or push it away, or whatever coping strategy that we've learned to deal with the things that life is throwing at us, and it's vigilant, waiting for that to happen. That vigilance starts to drop away when the life force energy, in my experience when I'm doing my work with folks, life force energy starts to come into the brainstem, and that vigilance starts to drop away, and often people start to get really relaxed, and sometimes even sleepy. There's this heaviness that their body sinks into the table, and there's this heaviness starts to happen, and to the point where sometimes people, maybe their body really doesn't even know the difference between this deeper level of relaxation that happens and sleep. And so they might start to sort of slip in and out of that hypnagogic place, that dream place, that sort of sleep, in and out of that sleep-like place. And, again, what's happening there is their system is sort of like getting used to a new baseline level of ease in their bodies. And so I tell people, if they can sort of stay present with the sensation of that heavy sinking place, that they can, integrate that, because their system is it's doing an important thing. It's not just that it's not just sleep. It's not just that they're falling asleep or getting tired. There is a new baseline level of ease that is developing in the system, and the system doesn't necessarily know recognize it as that. It recognizes it as, the closest thing we know to this is sleep. And so they might kind of like start to fall asleep. And that shows up in people's lives too, if they have that experience enough, this experience of those fetters, those binds sort of coming off of the control, the illusion that we've created of control, the illusion of trying to not feel uncertainty, trying to not feel vulnerability, and the energy and the vigilance that we use to maintain that. As that starts to fall away, it shows up in people's lives as well. And they might feel sort of fatigued or tired. They might notice that it's harder to get it up in the same way that they've, to do their lives in the same way. And I try to tell people that, again, if you really give yourself a chance, you will notice that you can still do the things that you need to do. You can get done the things that you need to do. It's just that you have to do them more slowly. And what's happening is a person is sort of getting used to this new baseline level of ease in their system. And they might find also that there are certain things, certain plates that they're spinning in their minds, certain ways that they're interacting with people, certain identities that they're trying to maintain, the plates that they're spinning, that they just don't want to spin those plates anymore. That suddenly thinking about, I don't know, doing the thing that you do when you're around your family to maintain the peace or whatever, things like that, holding up the image that you do at work, or or just with yourself or with your partner or whatever that you kind of are holding up, sustaining, all of a sudden, like, doing those things feels exhausting. And so there might also be some fear around, like, not letting those plates sort of drop completely and crash to the ground also. But there's this, this softening that's happening around the vigilance that is really maintaining an identity, sort of fundamental identity. Oftentimes those identities are, not originally us. We have adopted them from the people and the culture around us from a very early age, learned to create and embody a bunch of shoulds. And it's not an authentic expression of who we actually are. And those things, through the work that I'm doing here, I noticed that as that starts to dissolve or drop away, those identities start to drop away, tiredness is something that can happen. It can also show up in people's lives. Another sort of way to look at this is through a parts work. Parts work is a sort of therapeutic modality that I've recently discovered and integrated into the work that I do, based on the idea that we have multiple parts. And I always say different parts of our spine house different aspects of our being, and each of those parts has their own agenda, has their own thoughts, has their own emotions. And we can get into this situation where early on in our lives where we judge certain of those parts as wrong, or certain of those parts as right, and certain as acceptable, and others as not as acceptable. And then these survival patterns get installed that have us pushing away parts of ourselves in order to accentuate other parts, or to accentuate certain parts in certain situations and other parts in other situations. But what ends up what happens in us is that we have all these parts that are kind of like vying for attention often. And that's what, if you're experiencing sort of stuckness in life, or find yourself in a loop where you're sort of experiencing the same thing over and over and over and over again in a relationship or at work or whatever it is in life. It's often because there's some part of us that, maybe you want to be in a relationship, but there are other parts of you that are scared to death to be in a relationship. Or this relationship doesn't feel right anymore, but there are other parts of you that are scared to death that they'll never get in another relationship, so you stay in that relationship. Or, there are parts of me that want to, take the world by storm, and there are other parts of me that are scared to death of what that might mean. And so that creates drag in our system, and it creates internal conflict in our system. And this internal conflict is not only exists on this sort of like psychological level that I'm talking about it now, but it also exists on a physical level. We wall off parts of we use muscle tension to wall off parts of ourselves and the energy associated with them. We use our posture to wall parts off and separate them from other parts of ourselves. And then we put a limit on the range and depth of emotion. We'll give ourselves permission to experience, and we put a limit on the thoughts that we will believe, the belief systems that we have about ourselves, who we are in the world, and what's possible. And you know, it's just a natural part of the process as life is kind of like nudging us to evolve, to come into relationship with all these parts. And there are parts of us in this parts work model that have been protecting us. They've been doing a job, actually. They've been trying to help us not feel the vulnerability, trying to help us not feel uncertainty, and they've been doing that job for a long time. And they're tired, these parts. When we do the parts work and people start to come into relationship with these parts in their body, and they start to have a dialogue actually with these parts. And one of the things that is common that they discover is that these parts are like really tired. They feel unacknowledged, unseen, you know, doing a job that no one wants to do, doing a job they think has to be done for the survival of all, and they're really tired. They've been doing these jobs for a long time. And when we start to actually see those parts and come into relationship with those parts, we will feel how tired they are. We will start to embody those parts and actually feel how tired they are. And again, that's a natural sort of step. It also, natural step in the awakening process, but also kind of paradoxically, which you don't really expect until we experience it, is that like acknowledging these parts, actually feeling what they feel, feeling that they're tired, you know, hearing their story, suddenly, just by them feeling acknowledged, there is can instantly be sort of an integration in the system, and all of a sudden those parts don't have to, they feel they can relax. And the conflict, overall conflict in our system drops away. And so there's this ease that starts to happen in our system just by feeling those parts and actually relating to that tiredness. It makes me think of a client I saw online a year ago or so. He had, you know, been involved in some really shady stuff and done some not very nice things. And he had, at a young age, and he had not told anyone, and you know, now he was like 40 or something, so he'd been kind of holding a secret for a long time and had never told anyone. And the way he was trying to cope with it was he'd got into you know, spiritual healing world. He was doing a lot of like Joe Dispenza stuff, a lot of affirmations. And basically he was constantly trying to sort of like stay above the shame and the guilt, you know, the intense shame and guilt that he was actually, some part of him was actually feeling. He was constantly trying to sort of like stay above that, avoid it, not feel it. And you know, 20 years of trying this, 30 years of trying this, it was starting to really wear him down. And over a couple of sessions, he actually shared with me, he's like, I'd never talked to anyone, told anyone what I'd done. And he told me, and then he wanted to sort of like keep going, and I was like, just wait here, hold on. You've just done a huge thing. You've been holding this in secret your whole life. And you've just revealed it to someone. And, I'd like to think that I sort of like modeled for him and for that part. Part of the reason why he was afraid to sort of share it with anyone, of course, is because he was afraid, this part is afraid it was going to be judged. That's what it's afraid of. It's afraid of being judged. And I'd like to think, that that part did not feel judged by me, that it just felt seen and heard. And I said, like, hold on, like, wait, just see what you notice in your body after having like done this major thing of revealing this to me. Just see what you notice. And, it didn't make much sense to him. And he was just quiet for a bit. And then suddenly and this was a surprise to me too. I just kind of intuitively sensed like, hey, let's stop and like slow this thing down. Something just huge happened. Let's see how that plays out in your body, and bring your attention to your body. And all of a sudden he starts like, wow, like putting his hand on his desk, like, oh my gosh, like there's this like immense sort of fatigue. There's this immense tiredness that is coming over me, to the point where he had to, you know, put his head on the desk. Eventually I had him laying down on the floor, just like let that take over, you know, and that was kind of the end of the session. So just an example of how this sort of awakening process can sort of reveal this deep exhaustion. And again, not a problem. It is an exhaustion that is part of the process, part of the healing process. Now, it also makes me think of, and I'm not exactly sure how it's connected, but I have a sense that it is connected in some way, that there are certain mystery conditions out there, things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, mononucleosis, Epstein-Barr, Lyme disease, MS, you know, these conditions that, of course, the medical world is becoming more and more adept at sort of understanding them, but largely doesn't understand and is not sure what causes these things. But part of these things, these mystery conditions, is often a deep fatigue that shows up. And often these people are really, in my experience, people I've worked with that have experienced these things, they're often like bright people. They are often people who have immense gifts and immense energy moving through them and lots to give. Very, very, very bright on some level, but maybe who have experienced trauma to some degree that caused them to, you know, want to put a lid on that brightness. And that conflict, my supposition anyway, is that conflict again starts to burn us out. You know, there's immense life force energy moving through us naturally, and life is kind of like wants that to be expressed. And then there is the survival pattern that is trying to put a lid on it, trying to, what's the electrical term? Trying to, anyway, there's these electrical things that sort of like pinch down on the flow of amps, flow of voltage. Can't remember what they're called, but anyway, that do that. So there's this force inside of us that's doing this, and it creates an immense amount of, you know, energy. It takes a lot of energy to do that. Eventually is going to lead to burnout. You know, it's going to wear us down. And I think that these sort of mystery conditions that involve fatigue, for whoever that might mean something to, might be connected to this phenomenon too. And that's not to say that the medical world doesn't have some part to play. Of course they do, and they have wisdom and knowledge to help those people, but I think they have something to do with that, this phenomenon of the awakening process and the exhaustion that happens. And just to say, those symptoms can occur in any number of ways. They can show up as back pain, as neck pain, as headaches, as when there's this conflict in the system and this pressure in the system, this friction in our system that's created, you know, that exists between us trying to lock down on our full expression and life constantly pushing that full expression to the surface. It can show up any number of ways. It can show up as a health crisis of various sorts. It can show up as mental, emotional issues. And all of those things, on some level, all those things can be used as a portal to awakening. All of those things represent parts of us. We often get into conflict with those parts, and we want to push those parts away. We want to make those symptoms go away and make those parts of us go away. But the truth is, those are all parts of us that are trying to, it's natural as the healing process unfolds for these different parts to come to the surface and for us to come into relationship with them. And so, you know, there are parts that feel stuck. There are parts that hurt. There are parts that feel sad. There are parts that feel really tired. And if we are trying to push those parts away, long term, it doesn't really work. That's when we sort of find ourselves coming back to this, oh, here's this fatigue again. Here's this chronic fatigue again. I'm so tired. I don't have the energy. Or here's this whatever the symptom is again. It's because there's a part of us involved that just wants to be heard and seen and felt. And so, again, just kind of trying to come from the lens of, you know, this fatigue that we might experience along with the spiritual awakening process, not so much as a problem, but as a portal, a window to wisdom, because all of these parts of us, the tired parts, the hurt parts, the sad parts, they actually have wisdom. On the flip side, they kind of have actually a wisdom for the whole of us. And if they get to be integrated, then it's like they can play along and give their gifts, share their gifts in the whole of us, and be like more of a team in this body. Like I said, there's many parts of us. If more of the parts are playing on the same page and towards the same goal, they actually all want the same thing, actually, then they all get on the same page more, and we can sort of express from a place of wholeness, and those parts, individual parts, can get to express their individual gifts. Again, the end goal of that is that we are able to express more of what our gifts are on the planet and serve other people with them and do the thing that it is we came here to do, you know, in alignment with everyone and in alignment with life. That is the satisfaction that comes from that, is the ultimate level of happiness that I think people are really seeking, aside from the sort of surface level of happiness that most people are seeking, this deep level of satisfaction from giving our gifts and sharing them. Okay, so I hope you have found this useful. I hope you found it interesting. Please like this, share it, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Get a free copy of my book, If You Didn't Hurt, How to Resolve Your Pain and Discover Your Life Purpose, by checking out my website at biosoulintegration.com. You get a free copy of that book. You can see other books. I have an online course that you can help have simple exercises to embody your soul's gifts, embody and decrease the pain in your body, and do that at home. What else do I have? I do online work with people, and I do hands-on work with people here in my office if you're in the Boulder area. Okay, so I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and I look forward to helping you express more life. Have a great day.